Oh, there you go.
If it happens, you can just click on that. Go to control panel.
Yeah.
And then just connect to a projector. And then it should actually show. There it is. Sure, this thing is.
What's there now?
Thanks. Can you see anything?
Folks, for those who've only arrived now, we've got a special request for you to switch your phones off completely off, not on silent, not on airplane mode, but completely off, please, because we have a bandwidth issue here. We're live streaming the AGM to the rest of the world for those who are interested, and John has a problem. There's only 4 megabytes of bandwidth here, and if we all logged on, as we may inadvertently be, he doesn't have enough bandwidth to video stream to the bird clubs that are joining us from Knysna and Cape Town and elsewhere, and perhaps members that are in the UK and elsewhere at the moment. Sorry.
Huh?
This is not off. John, do you know this? It's not off.
It's not that. I don't know.
Okay, we'll have to ask somebody who can. Ernst, can you help switch his phone off, please?
Do you want to run this shop thing? I did this all from this one. Sorry, it's me again. Before you, because I think before you closed it, that's the time just one thing, because you've been in lynch.
I've got one slide.
It was on the laptop that was here, wasn't it?
Yeah, I know there's really sorry, Mel. It's going to be tricky now. Folks, we can't even afford to have 4 cell phones on. 4 cell phones on is going to mean that we can't live stream this AGM. Every single cell phone has to be off. We apologize. If there's any doctors on call, it's a long way to Joburg in any case if there is a medical emergency.
Thanks.
Anybody need help switching their phones off? We've actually, John's got a very interesting device which he's using today, which can actually detect who is using their phones. And that's why he's got the earphones in his head. If we find anybody using their phones, they're buying a round of drinks for everybody tonight.
Just going to do one test, switch to a screen. Tell me when you see that. Looks messed up.
Just going to make the last announcement on the phone. There's a few more coming, sorry. Andy, Siobhan, Emma, Peter, the last 4 to arrive. Your phones have to be off completely, please, if you don't mind. Because we're live streaming, we need the width. You may be connecting inadvertently to Wi-Fi. Sorry to tell you. Siobhan, this is going to be particularly difficult for you. I know. 2 hours without WhatsApp.
Sorry, did you, I can't remember if I asked you, did you notice the screen? Oh my God, isn't that fantastic? Yeah, no, I have done, but I didn't have it as a slideshow. So it should be now. Tell me when you see it.
Sorry, if anybody comes in late, please, the folks at the back, just tell them to put their phones off. Simon, I don't know if you've got your phone on. Simon Fogarty. Yeah. Oh, is it off? Okay. So, because we won't be able to do this again and again. If there's any latecomers, those latecomers we just undo all John is trying to achieve. So please, Derek, you're the biggest guy in the room. If you don't mind. To you and God. Thanks, guys.
Is that full frame? Oh, that's it. That's the presentation. Sorry, hold on a second. Okay. I'm running now. Yeah. Okay, we're starting. Sorry, I missed you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm known to some of you, but certainly not all of you. My name is Roger Wanless. I have the privilege of being the chairman of the Executive Board of BirdLife South Africa. And I'm going to look damn stupid if my cell phone goes off on Firstly, a hearty welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. If I may, a special welcome. No names mentioned particularly, but we have several past presidents and past chairmen here. Welcome to them. Also our Golden Bird patrons, our corporate sponsors, and our community bird guides. Before I go any further, our community bird guides are a group of people of whom we are particularly proud. They've done an excellent job guiding the last few days, and I think several of them are here in the audience. If I could ask them, please, if they wouldn't mind standing up so we can see who they are, the community guides, we'd like to give you a round of applause. applause. The community rights, please. Thank you. We have a very full agenda, so part of my job is to keep things moving as fast as I reasonably can. You have the annual report in front of you, together with the minutes of the last meeting. It has only been placed in front of you now. However, those documents have been on our website for some time, and I'm sure most of you would have seen it. Firstly, if we can get rid of the formalities, the apologies. I know we have gathered at the desk the names of all those attendees. There are some members here some people here who are not members of BirdLife. They're most welcome, of course. But if you haven't signed the register, if I could ask you to remember, please, on the way up to sign the register. But Pam Barrett is keeping a list of apologies which we've received in advance. The minutes of the previous meeting have been on our website for some time. They are in front of you now. It's a very comprehensive, detailed set of minutes that were available some time ago. With your permission, I'd like to confirm those minutes of the annual general meeting held in Johannesburg last year. May I ask, does anybody have anything arising out of those minutes as a result of those minutes? In which case, I'd like those confirmed. And is there anything in particular in those minutes that anybody would like to raise at this point? There are, of course, many items which will be appearing through the agenda. But does anybody wish to say anything at this point about the last minute? Thank you. When we flocked together last, our president, Phoebe Barnard, spoke most eloquently of the deleterious effects of what she called unbridled hyper-consumerism. And the effects on that, on what she called the excess of our hunger for perpetual consumerism. Consequences for the spiritual and physical effect on we humans, you remember that, Phoebe? And the ecological effect on our precious planet. She argued that in addition to our wonderful practical conservation efforts, we needed to know that without tackling the bigger social and economic system in which we operate, we are in danger of losing our successes in conserving birds and biodiversity. It was an inspiring address, and I know we can look forward today to something equally stimulating and challenging. People, please welcome our Honorary President, Fabulous Phoebe.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How's the sound doing? Okay, we'll try a little bit more. I'm going to have to put my laptop here to one side, so we'll have to adjust the sound. Apologies for that. So, yeah, good afternoon. Do I need to take this screen down one? Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, lovers of birds and biodiversity, those who seek solace and inspiration in nature, and those whose lives are focused on understanding it scientifically. We are all here in this conference room at Skukuza after a really wonderful few days of scientific and layman's talks on birds, because we love biodiversity, and especially we love bird diversity. But my talk this year is going to be quite a bit less global in scale, much less presumptuous probably in some ways. I'd like to talk to you about diversity in general. I don't know whether any of you saw this concert. It was a group called Fynbos Calling, I believe, that played at the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town. I didn't manage to see them. But I felt that musical diversity and culinary diversity and any other kind of diversity is appropriate to talk about here. So I'd like to talk about broadening our participation in our society in bird conservation and bird-related careers. We may see birds as the harbingers. Sorry, it's a little bit like Wimbledon for me here. I hope you don't mind. we may see birds as harbingers of the health of ecosystems. And we may seek our recreation or our livelihoods by watching them, by atlasing, by photographing or filming them, or recording their bird songs, by leading tourists or other people to see them. We may make our livelihoods by conducting scientific research, or by assisting others to do so, by capturing and ringing birds, or undertaking monitoring, or by working in offices, as many of us do, to strengthen policy, planning and management related to efforts to conserve birds. In all of these ways of connecting with birds and biodiversity, I think we all have diversity as the unspoken value, the thing that we all aim to see, to achieve, you know, the maximum possible list on Birding Big Day, the most birds on our Sabbath 2 checklists. I think most of us have an intrinsic love of diversity, whether it's in nature, in music, in culinary traditions, in art. So I was entranced over the last few days, especially to hear more from people like Ian White and Alan Kemp, from Garth Batchelor and others, about the history of Kruger Park, the wonderful long-term studies that they have undertaken, and conservation activities over many years. And I'm sorry that I didn't think at the time to grab some of their slides, but these slides are, I think, meant to show some of the fascinating past. If you can just remember Ian White's slides and Alan Kemp's slides. And I think they were fascinating days. And although now we may look back at some of those days and comment that conservation had been, in many respects, perhaps too closely aligned to military or paramilitary activities, that it was national park management was too much about throwing up fences, putting around boreholes and tossing people out of national parks. I'd prefer to choose to be grateful that South Africa, like many countries, was privileged to have passionate and committed conservationists, black and white, to undertake early work. And if you don't know the story of, for example, that Corporal Nombolo Mdluli, whose statue is outside this room, do yourself a favor and go and read about his story there. I came to this country in 1983 as quite a young student. I was 22, thwarted by the ongoing bush war in Zimbabwe, where I was intending to take up a study from Oxford University of birds of prey and their uptake of pesticides at a little research station near Hwange National Park. To be honest, I didn't really want to come to South Africa in those days, although events in Zimbabwe dumped me here at the time at a wonderful conference run by John Mendelsohn. In the dark days of apartheid, it was an uncomfortable place for an Uitlander like me to be, and I was young and idealistic, like many of us. I'd misspent my youth perhaps boycotting jewelers' shops in Massachusetts which were selling Krugerrands. And so I didn't stay long in this country before heading off to Namibia, where I focused on trying to train postgraduate students in ecology, evolution, and ornithology. And I found there that Namibia was a much more relaxed society even in those days. It's one of my greatest pleasures, actually, that from those early days at a tiny little university, at least 5 of my students, I haven't been able to track them all down, now have their PhDs and are senior lecturers or professors themselves. So much has changed since those days, and yet so much has not changed. I think to be effective in the conservation of birds and other biodiversity, we need to make sure that we, ornithologists and bird conservationists and birders, are not committing the cardinal sin of just talking inwards, but that we increasingly talk outwards into our wider society and outside our own cultural groups. Most importantly, talking with many voices. But despite having many voices, having universal messages about the value of diversity, about the value of birds and bird conservation. Now, South Africa is an extraordinarily diverse country, both biologically and culturally, as we all know. Up until quite recently, it's clear that most of our voices in conservation have been from a paradigm that is relatively scientifically based, relatively privileged, relatively influenced by ecological paradigms from the Northern Hemisphere, relatively middle class, disproportionately white. And I think we all know that while these voices are absolutely crucial and are a huge asset to this country, make no mistake about what I'm saying, they've helped put South Africa in an extraordinary place in ornithology and in bird conservation. On their own, these voices are clearly not enough. I'm happy to say that BirdLife South Africa and our partners in universities and other organizations have made major strides over the last 5 or more years to try to broaden participation in birding, in bird conservation, ornithology, and other bird-related careers. I need to emphasize this, I think. Staffing, training, engagement in citizen science, particularly the Bird Guides program, have been very effective at drawing in extremely talented and wonderful people, some of whom we just gave a round of applause to and welcomed. I'd like to mention, just as a few, Bokamoso Lebepe, Sakamuzi Mhlongo, David Letwalo, Christopher Ntonzi, Samson Malaudzi, Raymond Rumpolapeng, Tembo Ntembu, Junior Klavela, Chifiwe Mandiwe Nidhani, and Amusa Mukongo. Forgive me, I can't mention everybody who's been here and given wonderful talks or wonderful guiding events. But we have a variety of very talented staff, academics, students, and guides who have brought important results, perspectives on ornithology and birding, conservation, evolution to the table. But I think we need to work harder to give a voice to the many varied, interesting people from quite different backgrounds all across the country. More and more, every year, all of us need to be doing something to help bring that about, in order to reflect different ways in which South Africans of all backgrounds relate to nature. Okay, we'll say nothing about that. And ways in which we can all be persuaded to protect and value biodiversity in our lives. I often spoke about transformation of ornithology in South Africa with Phil Hockey and Morné du Plessis, as well as Peter Ryan at the FITS. Like most universities, UCT has a certain amount of trouble attracting young, good Black South African students to field biology and ornithology. They've tried many things and had pretty good success under the circumstances. But it's been very much easier, I think it's fair to say, to attract other African students, especially from other English-speaking countries on the continent. Speaking just for myself, and I'm only one of many people who are an example of this, half of my PhD students and one of my 3 postdocs so far have been from other African countries, Lesotho, Kenya, Nigeria in particular. And Phil Hockey experienced the same. Here were my students and current postdoc, Dayo Osanubi at the bottom, who's starting up the Intra-African Bird Migration Project, a program at the FITS, which we're very excited about. But I had a chance to look at Phil Hockey's CV recently, and I observed among his students some wonderful students from other countries, Rwanda, Sudan, Nigeria, Malawi, Kenya, Zimbabwe. And I think it's important to try to find ways to make that balance. Now, in the university environment, we know all about this. We're trying to work on it. And at my institute, Sanvi especially. It's honestly been very tough to find students from South Africa with the right combination of an interest in ornithology or field biology and a solid preparation in maths and science, which you need to do in undergraduate and especially postgraduate degrees. And therein lies the rub of this country, because as we know, apartheid education crippled the society, and we're observing the effects of it now. Poor subsequent investment in maths and science education by more recent governments. So like many of us in the science, policy, research, education arenas, I've been trying to work on and with capacity building mechanisms to build that pipeline for academic ornithology, but also for related fields. Students have to be targeted earlier than their undergraduate education. We know that we really need to reach them in primary school, if not before. So we need much stronger relationships with the organizations that are active in wilderness education, primary and secondary education, and universities to help build that pipeline from a very early age. Now, the recent collaboration between the University of Limpopo and Derek Engelbrecht's team with the University of Cape Town has helped in the interim to pair talented young undergraduates in Limpopo with the FITSES programs, their projects and undergraduates. And I know that BirdLife South Africa and other organizations are undertaking similar partnerships. So I think there's not much reason that in the next decade we can't have made massive progress in increasing the enrollment and employment of Black South Africans in field biology, ornithology, and conservation. Every one of us has a unique story to tell, different background, different personal histories, different perspectives. But to do that, we need to keep up active training, I think, especially in field ecology and conservation. It's a program that I've been pushing at the national level between SANBI and Green Matter, which, as many of you will know, is the body tasked with biodiversity conservation, human capacity development. But I particularly just want to mention before closing the Tropical Biology Association and the Organization for Tropical Studies, both of which are active in Africa and are phenomenal allies in field training. And TBA graduates, a particular source of good master's students for the FITSES CB Master's course. In the eastern Usambara Mountains in Tanzania for a month in 2014, while teaching with the TBA, Tropical Biology Association, I encountered absolutely wonderful role models for young ornithologists, bird ringers, bird guides, and bird-based tourism operators, not least this guy here on the upper right, I don't know where they go, Dr. Chacha Werema, who's looking at climate change and altitudinal migration of greenbills in forests. And in the other two photos, the brothers Alois and Victor Nkongewa, who are young bird business people in the East Usambaras. One, Victor, who operates and manages a permanent camp of bird ringing and monitoring for a US-based research project, and his brother Alois, who's a talented bird guide, and together they have built, or are building at least, a hostel for bird tourism. I just didn't want to pass this other slide before mentioning on the lower center here, anyone recognize him in sunglasses? Leon Benon of BirdLife International, formerly of BirdLife International, who was one of the pivotal people that helped bring about wonderful capacity development in ornithology in East Africa. And so with BirdLife, I've been talking about trying to raise funds to engage an exchange program of southern and eastern black bird guides, bird ringers, and researchers. I want to close just by making that last point. Varied careers are open for those with passion and commitment of whatever color and shape and creed. Not just academic ornithologists or bird conservationists, but also bird research assistants, monitoring projects managers like Alois, Victor and Kongewa, bird ringers, research site technical people, tour accommodation facilities managers, policy strategists, and directors in government institutes. There's so many paths to diversity in bird conservation and research to increasingly walk them all. Those of you who are engaged with bird clubs, I know that many of you are doing good work at bringing in people from outside your communities to share in the excitement and passion of birding. Please do more. Every person that's brought into the fold changes that person's life and changes the caliber and the quality of what we do into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phoebe. Once again, you do us proud. We shall miss your wise words next year, but I'm sure Colleen will be up to the task next time. The next item on the agenda, my pleasure to ask Mark Anderson to present the Chief Executive's report for 2015.
Thanks very much, Roger. Hello, everyone. And it's wonderful to stand here and present this annual report to you. I'm a little bit worried. We've heard that some people think that the AGM starts at 3. So there could be people that are going to be coming in half an hour, which would be unfortunate. So my job is to report on our work during 2015. You'll find in front of you there's an annual report, which also summarizes some of our work. One of the most difficult jobs we have during the year is actually summarizing all the great amount of work that's been done by our organization. Okay, so I'm going to just briefly through a few slides to share with you some of our achievements during 2015. We ended last year on a fairly high note. BirdLife International did a review, a new system they developed called Quality Assurance System to evaluate the BirdLife partners' performance. So all 120 partners' performance was evaluated. 101 questions were asked, online questions. We had to submit supporting documents, and we came out with flying colors, which was very pleasing indeed. And I think of all 120 partners, we were one of the top performers, which was very, very encouraging for us. Obviously, some room for improvement here and there, but it was nice to get this favorable review. And in your report too, you'll see a summary of a review that Professor Peter Ryan has done of our conservation work. And equally, Peter has come forward with a nice review of the conservation work we do. There's a more detailed review that I have available if anybody'd like Peter's review. I'll maybe just send that to you. So we're doing some really good stuff, and it's due to a big team. Now, this is the BirdLife South Africa staff in 2015 at our staff meeting. I think the only one missing in that image was Ross, who was traveling internationally at the time. But no single person or no program, no group of people can take credit for all the achievements. It's a collaborative effort. I think everybody sitting in this room today is contributing to the fantastic work that we do. And I feel really, at times people heap some of the praise on me and on some of our staff. And although we do appreciate it, there's a large number of people who are contributing to our success. One of these people is Dr. Roelof van der Merwe, who unfortunately passed away at the end of last year. And I'd like to dedicate this presentation to him. He's no longer with us. He was a passionate conservationist. I was fortunate to spend a lot of time with him during the last few years. He died relatively young at 57. He gives us a lot of money through the Charles van der Merwe Trust, I think 1.7 million rand this year, funds a number of our projects and programs. So I'd like to dedicate this talk to Roelof. Okay, so he provides the money. The money's certainly been helpful, as well as the income that we've received from other sources. And that graph illustrates a few points. Importantly, as you can see, the distance from the histogram and that red line, and that means that our income has exceeded our expenditure, which is, of course, very important for us. In the past, we've spent more than we've had, and we've had to dip into the sustainability fund. We've now been able to replenish that sustainability fund over the last few years. So 2015 was the 6th consecutive year that we made a small surplus. We're very proud of that. The green in those histograms illustrates the conservation expenditure, and the blue, the admin expenditure. You can see there, particularly in 2015, that a greater proportion, about 2/3 of our funding is spent on conservation, and about a third is spent on admin, sorry. This is just another graph which kind of illustrates it as well. Unfortunately, this projector is not projecting brilliantly, so you can't see very clearly. But what it does show over the last few years is our income has exceeded our expenditure. And it's the way we try to manage the organization, that we do not suffer any losses. Very importantly is to find the funding to sustain core. Alan Knott Craig, our good friend Alan Knott Craig, who you know is not very well at the moment, he's retired down to wilderness, told me a few years ago to do away with that word core and rather refer to it as bird species and habitat conservation administrative support. We've decided to stick with core for the time being. But the challenge really is to find funding for core. That pie diagram illustrates where we're getting our core funding from. And you can see a big proportion, the sort of orange wedge, is the golden bird patrons, 1.62 million rand last year. It was Darby Chamberlain's idea. Quite a number of our golden bird patrons are in this room today. We really need to thank Darby for his clever idea, and we need to thank our golden bird patrons for their ongoing support. It's relatively easy to raise money for projects, very, very difficult to raise funding for the administrative work which supports the conservation projects. The blue square, the blue piece of the pie is funding we received from the RSPB. The green is funding we've received from the Hunthausen Charitable Trust. Both of those are slowly coming to an end. Sorry, Ross, is there? Okay, let's hang on while Ross tries to fix the screen.
Lay hands on the computer.
Sorry, it's a very dodgy cable we have here. Okay, so the blue and the green are two sources of income that are not going to continue into the future, unfortunately. The RSPB funding for institutional support is going to end. The Hunthausen Charitable Trust contribution for our core work is also going to end. Okay, one of the achievements, the most significant achievements last year, we believe, is Still House, our new head office. And we're very proud of the new office. It's a project which we thought would take a number of years to achieve. Thanks to Pamela and Neville Isdall, the significant contribution, as well as the donations from other people, we were able to achieve this new office relatively quickly. Importantly, this funding was allocated specifically for this project, specifically for the purchase of the new office. It was not money that was allocated to conservation. The Isdalls, in particular, wanted to leave a legacy in Johannesburg. They wanted to have a property named after them. That was one of the conditions of the donation. It was very important for us to move to a new home. The previous office wasn't suited. We had insufficient space. There were some security risks that we were worried about. We had repeated break-ins. And we also, the property was zoned incorrectly. It was zoned residential and not for business. So we're very proud of our new office. And for those who haven't visited the office, please come and pay us a visit. Come around in the morning and you can come and purchase some items at the shop. In November last year, we had a function where we wet the roof of the new office, a function that the Isdalls also paid for. It was a very grand affair, and a lot of you attended that function. One of the successful events that we held last year. We've held a number of other events in 2015. One of them was the inaugural Flufftail Festival, a festival that was used to raise awareness, obviously, about flufftails, and particularly the white-winged flufftail, critically endangered species, but also other water birds, as well as wetlands and water. And it's a partnership between Eskom, Grand Water, and BirdLife South Africa. You can see the tap duck there who entertained the children. We put table talkers on the tables in all the restaurants in Sandton City, posters, tool wobblers up on the tools throughout Sandton City. This year, we held the event at Cresta Shopping Centre. We also held a very successful photographic competition during the Oceans of Life Festival. And those are some of the winning images. A large number of other events have been held. We launched the IBAS directory in Johannesburg at the time of a Rare Bird Club visit. And in the top slide, bottom right is Nick Prentice, one of the Rare Bird Club members and also the treasurer of BirdLife International. We've held a number of other events to raise money for our conservation work, and the bottom slide shows Phil Leggett, the voice of cycling, who's done the commentary on the Tour de France for many decades, and he's been helping the IBA program raise funding for their work. We also have an exhibit table at the Photo and Film Expo and other events in Johannesburg, and Shireen and her team in the membership program use the opportunity to raise awareness about our organization, but very importantly, to recruit new members and magazine subscribers. And our magazine continues to do very well under the chairmanship of the management committee of Darby Chamberlain. We're very proud of the magazine. We've now produced it for more than 3 years. I think we're in our 21st issue now, and it is going from strength to strength. And really a feather in the cap of Eve Gracie, our editor, Bryony van Wyk, our designer, and the rest of the magazine team. In this graph, you can see that the subscriber numbers in particular, the red line at the bottom, is showing us a positive increase, a nice positive trend. We have more and more magazine subscribers. The green graph, which is sort of up and down, the green line is the retail sales. They're up and down, but there's a general positive trend there. We are selling more of the magazines in retail. And the good news, which we heard just 2 weeks ago, is that we're going to be in another 169 Pick and Pay stores, which brings us to about 220 Pick and Pay stores around the country. Unfortunately, you can see the blue line at the top. We have had a slight decrease in the number of members during the last few months, and these are members who receive the magazine as a membership benefit. And there's reasons for that, which I could speak to later if you're interested. So the magazine has been very important. The main aim of the magazine is to create awareness about birds, about bird conservation, and about our organization. We also do other things to raise awareness about our work and our partnerships with companies like Zeiss. We have this billboard which is developed, and one of our staff, Dale Wright, is the actor we used. Took a while for Mel Tripp, our advertising and marketing advisor, to get that crystal barber to sit in Dale's cap. Whenever this eventually happened, we could take that picture. This has been up on billboards around the country and many other billboards, and we're grateful for the contribution we receive from Continental Outdoor Media. The value over the years of those billboards has been massive, in the millions of rands. We've been quite innovative in the way that we create awareness about the work that we do, including last year during Bird of the Year. Bird of the Year last year, as some of you will know, most of you will know, is the blue crane. And we produced posters and pin badges and lesson plans and other materials which were distributed widely around the country. We also put up these very clever banners on cranes in Sandton. That's actually on the new Sasol building, and the sign says "Real Cranes Fly." Again, Mel Tripp's very clever idea. And this was a talking point in Johannesburg for some time. We also ran another sort of marketing campaign last year, and one that was a little bit more controversial, or remains controversial till today, is the announcement of the discovery of this new species called the TULUVER. And the TULUVER, the picture on the right, is actually a photoshopped lappet-faced vulture. Some people think vultures are ugly. We asked Utopia, our ad agency, to Photoshop a vulture into something pretty. They assumed that was pretty. We then made an announcement across South Africa, across the country, saying that we discovered a new species in the Mapungubwe area. We found 4 nests of these birds, the TULUVER. TULUVER, for those who don't know, is an anagram for vulture. You take the letters in the word vulture, scramble them up, you get TULUVER. So Saturday Star were in on the story with us. They put those posters on lampposts throughout Johannesburg on that Saturday morning, and we made the announcement on Facebook and elsewhere. Within 36 hours, I think we had a reach of about 350,000 people on Facebook. So very significant. I was very worried. My past chairman, Peter Sullivan, was in East Africa at that stage on a UN mission. I emailed him and I said, Peter, should I be worried? Is my job in jeopardy for this controversial campaign? A credible scientific organization renouncing the discovery of a new species. And he said, don't worry, he's been following it through the day. We're achieving exactly what we wanted to achieve. We did, however, bring the announcement of the reveal forward. We decided that we will release the video, the YouTube video, which shows the reverse photoshopping of the TULUVER to the lappet-faced vulture. We brought it forward a few days, released it on the Wednesday instead of the Saturday on International Vulture Awareness Day. The key message of the TULUVER campaign was this: if we can get this passionate about discovering a new species, and you can understand that the Twitchers were really excited about this new species that they could go and observe in Mapungubwe. So if we get this passionate about discovering a new species, why can't we get as passionate about losing one? And that was really the message. Utopia, our ad agency, our pro bono ad agency, asked whether a media company that contacted them could run a little exercise to determine what our global reach was through the TULUVER campaign. We agreed. They undertook this research and they produced a very thick report, little of which I understand. Our global reach was 81.4 million people. So this little TULUVER campaign was far more effective than previous press releases we put out during International Vulture Awareness Day. Okay, that's just some of the awareness work. I'm just going to run through a few slides talking about some of our conservation work, and obviously this is the bread and butter of the organization. This is what we do. This is what we're about. We're about conserving birds and their habitats. Starting with terrestrial bird conservation, and this is Hanneline Smith-Robinson's program. There's a lot of work that's done by her and her staff. Just mentioning a couple of the points. She's obviously got an extensive program underway on white-winged flufftails, one of our critically endangered species, possibly our rarest species. Research is being undertaken. Some of you would have heard some of the work earlier this week, particularly the genetics work, which is shown that the Ethiopian and South African birds are genetically similar, identical. So it's one population that's moving between the two regions. She also participated in an African-Eurasian Waterbird Agreement white-winged flufftail international working group meeting in Ethiopia. Lots happening on the white-winged flufftail front. We also hope to raise money, and those who have received the March-April issue of African BirdLife magazine will see the appeal that we've included to raise money for the facility we'd like to construct at the Pretoria Zoo, the National Zoological Gardens. We're also tracking secretary birds, and Ernst Retief gave a fascinating presentation yesterday on the secretary bird work. This is not just knowledge that we'd like to gain because we don't know how far secretaries move. There's so many reasons, so many things that we are finding that are going to improve our conservation work to conserve this threatened species. And I was very impressed with some of the results, particularly seeing the kind of environments, the landscape the secretary bird is using. We think it's using a lot of the landscape. There's actually a little of the landscape it's using because some of it is transformed and are clearly unsuitable for secretary birds. We're also involved in tighter falcon work with Dr. Andrew Jenkins and his team, one of our also very threatened species. And then also Hanneline and a team coordinated a project to survey southern banded snake eagles in KwaZulu-Natal. And Johan du Plessis gave a presentation about that earlier this week too. We're also very proud of the work that we've done through the Ngula Partnership. It's really a partnership between Middlepit Wetland Trust, Eskom, and BirdLife South Africa, in Ngula and the border of KwaZulu-Natal and the Free State. And David Bapisa, who was the initial person employed by this partnership at Ngula, received his PhD at the end of last year on adaptive management program for the high altitude grasslands, which will benefit grassland birds. Very importantly, the results of his findings will not only benefit the Ngula property, but the high altitude grasslands over a wider area. We're also doing other work at Ngula, species monitoring, developing species action plans. We've also been involved with the proclamation of the property as a nature reserve. Okay, we're very involved in renewable energy work, and this is work that's funded by Investec. Samantha Ralston's our project manager. Very importantly, you need to understand that we support renewable energy, but we support the responsible development of renewable energy. There were a few presentations on this during the last few days. There's lots of activities we're involved in: site screening, setting standards for impact assessments and monitoring. We've been developing guidelines for both wind and solar, quality control and oversight. Very importantly, we don't get involved in doing environmental impact assessments. We'd like to remain the referee and not the player too. We're involved in capacity building, particularly with the Department of Environmental Affairs, communication and information exchange. There's a wind energy specialist group and a forum that meets annually. We've also been involved in identifying research priorities and collaborating with the Percy Fitzpatrick Institute going into the future on a number of important projects to look at the potential impacts of wind and solar on birds. Okay, we're very involved in seabird conservation work, and I think a lot of you'll be aware of this. There's been quite a few presentations the last few days. One bird that we're very worried about is the African penguin. We don't know how many birds we had, but it's estimated that about 100 years ago we could have had 1 million pairs. We're down to less than 20,000 today. So we're doing a lot of work on this very threatened species. One is the work with fisheries and the island closure experiments, and those continue. We have new capacity in the program. Dr. Tara Morris was appointed last year to undertake this island closure work and also to work on the tracking of African penguins, and her work is funded by the Charles van der Merwe Trust. Christina Hagen was moved across to another position, the Pamela Isdell Fellow of Penguin Conservation, and her responsibility is mainly going to be to see that we establish this new mainland colony for African penguins. It's probably going to be at Plettenberg Bay, and you would have heard a bit more about that earlier in the week too. We're very excited about the work that we've received through the FAO, $1.5 million, to implement some work in the high seas. And this is really to try and address the problems of seabird bycatch and improve the mitigation measures that are used. Bronwyn Marie, who's been the leader of our Albatross Task Force for a number of years, resigned, and she's now taken up the position of project coordinator for this very important project. She's going to have a lot of responsibilities. I had a meeting with her a few days ago. She's very nervous about all the challenges that lie ahead for her, but she's going to be managing the reporting and logistics, managing the team, arranging 4 big global capacity building workshops. She's going to undertake the first ever global assessment of seabird bycatch. So Ron's going to have her work cut out in the future. We've also just appointed Dr. Yuna Kim. She's come across from Australia. She's a Korean, has a PhD in seabird research. She's going to be liaising with the high seas fleets to inform the officials, the vessel owners and the skippers about the international obligations. There are all sorts of international obligations which they have to make sure are addressed. She'll also be training the fleet's observers to conduct trials and demonstrate best practice for reducing seabird bycatch. So Yuna is already in South Africa, based in Cape Town in the Seabird Conservation Office. We have a third staff member, Johan Koch, who was appointed early this year, and he's going to be going onto the long line fishing vessels in the Cape Town harbour to conduct outreach and to gather information about seabird bycatch practices. I've really abbreviated what these 3 people are going to be doing, but I can tell you now they have their work cut out for them. This is our opportunity to take what we've learned from Cape Town, what Ross and his team have learned from Cape Town working with our fisheries into the high seas, and to have a much more global impact, a much bigger contribution to the conservation of the world's seabirds. So those are the 2 species conservation programs. We of course also work on habitats and sites, and that map there shows the important bird and biodiversity areas around the country, all 112 of them. We're very proud last year to launch 2 important publications, the important bird and biodiversity areas of South Africa, and then the IBA status report. For those of you who don't have copies, I'd encourage you to purchase copies. There are some available outside. Every bird watcher should have a copy, at least of the IBA directory, in their libraries. Now, this was the culmination of 4 years of work, extensive work by Daniel Marnovic and his team, visiting all of these IBAs, and taking assessments of all of those IBAs, re-looking at the boundaries of the IBAs, taking into account the distribution of birds, using the SABAP2 data, and more. So the IBA directory is a significant improvement and an update on the original IBA directory, which was published in 1998. We do now know the state of South Africa's IBA network and the most important threats which these IBAs face. And that diagram there illustrates some of the threats, some of the most important threats, and these are really not new to us, but we've now been able to quantify them. Agriculture, the most important threat. Natural system modifications, these are things like mining, urbanization, invasive plants in particular. So these are some of the threats that our IBAs face. We will in the future repeat the exercise, undertake these assessments again. We will then not produce an IBA status report, but an IBA status and trends report. Very importantly, we are doing a lot of work to ensure that these IBAs are protected. Only about half of the IBAs are formally protected as provincial nature reserves or national parks. Most of them remain in private ownership. we're using biodiversity stewardship to protect these IBAs. And you can see on that map, there's quite a few of the IBAs are circled in blue in the eastern parts of the country and then in the western parts of the country along the coastline. And those are the IBAs in which we're undertaking stewardship work, working with the landowners to try and unlock some of the benefits that they can derive through tax breaks and financial incentives to conserve those important sites. Don't worry about all the detail in that table, but very importantly, that lists in the blue down the left, those 9 IBAs that we're working on. If we are successful in conserving those 9 IBAs, we will add another 193,000 hectares to the country's conservation estate, which is very significant. Now, there's very little money these days for formal acquisition of national parks and nature reserves. This would be a significant contribution that we could make. These IBAs, 9 IBAs, protect a whole lot of threatened species, those which I've circled in red. Okay, one of the important things that we do, and this is particularly through Simon Gear's work as our policy and advocacy manager, is to ensure that any developments that take place in important bird and biodiversity areas are done in a sustainable way. And if we think that the impact is severe, we will get involved. We will register as interested and affected parties, submit comments, attend public meetings, and if necessary, even take legal action to ensure that they do not take place. And let's just list some of the work that Simon's involved with. There's the Middelpunt wetland, the most important site in South Africa for white-winged flufftails. There's 2 mining applications there, which we've been involved with opposing, making use of some of our legal experts, particularly those at the Centre for Environmental Rights in Cape Town. We've been involved in gas prospecting along the west coast, as well as in the Kruger and Natal. We're very concerned about these CSP plants and the effects that they can have on birds. And more recently, vultures and the mortalities we're experiencing, not only in South Africa, but elsewhere in Southern Africa, and in fact across the continent. And one of the things that Simon Gear is going to be doing as our policy and advocacy manager is seeing how we can bring the problem of vulture poisonings across the continent onto the agendas of government meetings like the African Union. And a lot of work is already happening in these areas. So BirdLife South Africa doesn't only restrict its work to South Africa. Through Simon's work, we engage with our colleagues in Nairobi, our colleagues in Sandy and Cambridge in England, but also we are now doing partner development work in South Africa. We were identified as one of the stronger BirdLife partners in Africa and the Middle East. We're one of only 2 partners in Africa and the Middle East who are now working as giving partner support to neighboring countries and other partners, and Martin Taylor heads up this program. We've just recently concluded a project in Mozambique using Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, where we tried to build civil society capacity. A very successful project. This work has now been completed, and we're going to continue to engage with this organization as a potential precursor for a BirdLife partner in Mozambique. Most importantly, Martin's involved in Zimbabwe, working with BirdLife Zimbabwe, giving them technical assistance and particularly with assistance with fundraising. You can imagine, well, we know in South Africa it's difficult to raise money for our conservation work. It must be even harder in Zimbabwe. So we are the supporting partner for BirdLife Zimbabwe, and Martin spent about 3/4 of his time helping BirdLife Zimbabwe and been successful recently in a number of funding applications. And a number of those have been submitted to conduct work on vultures, places like Hwange National Park. Martin's also going to be involved in a big waterbird survey along the east coast of Africa. We're also involved in the East Atlantic Flyway Initiative. This is work that's been coordinated by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, our partner in England. And a lot of their birds migrate down our west coast along the East Atlantic Flyway and not down the east coast of Africa. So they want to sort of increase their efforts in those countries along the west coast to ensure that these countries and these the important habits are protected. And Martin's been submitting proposals for trying to take waterbird surveys at some of the key sites in Namibia. The other very important publication that we launched last year was our revision of the Red Data Book, and we're very grateful to Eskom for the funding to ensure that this project could be undertaken. It's been 15 years since the previous Red Data Book was published. Barnes 2000 was finally revised as Taylor, Fancy Peacock and Oneness 2015. 85 species are listed as threatened, 47 as near threatened. So the number of birds listed in the red data book has increased from 125 to 132. Very importantly, there are now more species in the endangered and critically endangered categories. So things are not better off for our birds. We're particularly worried about two groups of birds, raptors and seabirds. And Martin and I spent some time today discussing how we can improve our efforts to particularly initiate projects on these most threatened groups of birds. Now, I spoke about the IBAS directory earlier, and I spoke about the red data book now. These two projects would not have been possible without the information that's been collected during the Southern African Bird Atlas projects, and particularly SABAP2, the most recent project. And then Stratif put this diagram together for me. Forget about all the detail, and all that I think you should focus on is 2015. On the right there, you can see that very long orange bar, and that's the number of cards, SABAP2 cards that were submitted in 2015. Despite initial concerns about sustaining this project well into the future, there's been fantastic uptake, increased observers, increased submissions of Atlas cards. And I think BirdLife, the online application that's been developed to submit Atlas data, has certainly helped. But we would not be able to do what we do without these very important data. And we need to thank all of the citizen scientists. I think many of you that are sitting here today are involved in these projects, and you're contributing ultimately then to bird conservation by atlasing. So thank you very much for that, and please continue doing so. So I've listed some of the successes, and just really at the end, I would just like to say that there are also a number of challenges. And these are the things that keep us awake at night, all the conservation challenges. And the presentations during the 2 days of lab spoke about many of these challenges. There are numerous challenges. And we're really going to have to think very cleverly about how we address them. There were some presentations on very innovative solutions to addressing these challenges, the work we're doing, working with renewable energy developers, the work we're doing with fisheries, to try and develop and implement mitigation measures, the African penguin mainland colony. These are some of the solutions that we are developing to resolve some of these challenges. We worry about the economic climate and the ability for us to raise money to do our work. We worry about political apathy. It just seems sometimes, particularly within the provinces, there's just not support for what we are trying to do. The legislation is in place. We sign these important multilateral environmental agreements. It just doesn't seem to be the political concern and interest for us to achieve our important conservation goal. Another challenge we have is the critics that are out there. And I think this is something that kind of concerns me personally. I was in Cape Town recently, somebody referred to them as armchair critics. I just look at our team of staff, our 35 staff, how they slave away day after day, getting out there into the field at the coalface of conservation, addressing the most important threats and making a difference. And the people can sit behind their computers on Facebook, critical not of the developers, of the people who are having the impact, but of the conservation organizations like us and our fellow conservation organizations who are doing all we can to try and address the important threats and to conserve our biodiversity and our habitats. And lastly, the challenge is the membership demographics. Look at this audience again. We remain fairly white. It's another thing that we're going to have to deal with. Looking ahead, there's a lot of exciting things that we're going to be doing. The conservation programs, we have lots of plans there. Spoke about the FAO-funded work that we're going to be doing in the high seas, initiating new projects on some of the critically endangered species. We're very grateful for the funding we've received from the Dawn Group. We have employed a social media expert, Siobhan Nagia, who's going to be helping us reach 100,000 young people through social media. There's the challenge, Siobhan. And she's now hiding under the table in embarrassment. But we're going to use innovative methods to reach young people. We've employed Ian Outram with funding from the Rare Bird Club to revitalize our community bird guide project. We're going to be doing lots of fundraising for core, fundraising for new projects. We'd like to build a fluff-tail facility at the National Zoological Gardens in Pretoria. We need assistance to build this facility. We'd like to eradicate mice from Marion Island. That project's going to cost about 80 million rand, if anybody's interested in supporting that. We'd like to have an office for our staff in Cape Town. Ross, I put this in especially for you. It doesn't make sense for us to spend 30,000 rand on rent a month for office space. It'd be nice to have our own office. in Cape Town. We're planning a number of events. You may know that Sasol has withdrawn their sponsorship for most of the conservation projects around the country. They're going through tough times with the declining oil price. We don't have their funding for the bird fair anymore, so we're going to have a new bird fair going forward. Possibly we call the South African Bird Fair or the BirdLife Bird Fair. We're going to be holding an art evening at Eskom House later this year to raise money for our work. We're going to be holding a Flock at Sea again trip in April 2017, and that's going to take a lot of organization. So lots happening, and just as I said, reporting on some of the work that we do. I'd just like to say at the end that we appreciate the support we receive from everybody. That picture was taken a couple of days ago. That's not all of the delegates that attended the layman's and science labs, just some of them. Others were out birding, some were still in the building attending meetings at that time. But we really appreciate this massive support. And again, our successes are due to the collaborations, all the contributions we receive from our members, from our bird clubs, from our volunteers, the citizen scientists, everybody else is assisting us in our massive task to conserve our country's birds and their habitats. And I'd like to thank you for all you do to support our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. An amazing amount of work that's going on. We've had an inspiring address from Phoebe. The Chief Executive has reported comprehensively on the affairs and the business of BirdLife during the past year. The next item on the agenda says my report. I'm not going to report, I promise. I'm going to keep you for only a short while. And the two things that I wish to do. One is a report back of sorts, and secondly, I wish to make a few other additional comments. But before I do that, I can see what's happening here. Most of you boys and girls were up at 4:30 this morning. I can see the levels of concentration dropping. I want to make sure that you're listening, so I'm going to do something. It might irritate the Chief Executive, I don't care. I want to make sure you're listening to me. So, whenever I utter the word fabulous, I want to hear 253 Adidas in response. When I use that word fabulous, I want to hear Adidas, agitated Adidas. If any of you don't know what an Adidas sounds like, I'm going to ask my friend, Desperate Darby and his mates to give an example. Darby? That's right. When you hear that word, I want to hear 250 of those ones. At the AGM last year, we replaced the existing BirdLife Constitution with a new one. It involved dissolving the council, which had previously met twice a year, with an executive board, which thenceforth met monthly, with a board of directors, which fulfilled the function that you would ordinarily expect from a board of directors. More professional and we hope more organized. In addition, we began to set in motion a formal and vigorous performance management system. That involved several phases. This is after March last year, it involved focusing clearly on the organization's vision and mission. Thereafter, setting key areas against which we would measure performance or failure on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. In other words, we had to get hold of BirdLife and figure out on an ongoing basis how we were performing and fulfilling our function. So it involves several phases. The process is written in the annual report, which you have before you. Because we only introduced this in the middle of the year, this year has necessarily been slightly truncated. It will be bigger and better and more organized next year. It involves us focusing on the vision and mission, and that's critical. Unless we know what we're doing, why we're here, what we're about, we're really floundering around. We then have tools for measuring on an ongoing basis how we're performing. On a quarterly basis, the executive board, individual members complete a detailed questionnaire focusing on dozens of core areas, key areas, which are important to not only our conservation success, but business probity as well. As Mark said, BirdLife International regard us as a key partner. They also regard us as one of the better organized and compliant BirdLife partners in terms of governance, transparency, and accountability. Very, very important. So on a quarterly basis from now on, we review the work that we've done against those key areas to review our performance against what we should be doing. In other words, we're after performance measurement, governance, transparency, and ultimately greater success, both in the conservation area and in how we run what has morphed from a fairly small NGO over the last decade or so into a fairly substantial business. The process also involves a self-appraisal by the board. Individual board members now, on a regular basis, review those key areas and judge the board in terms of how we have performed. It's a rigorous, comprehensive, detailed process. You will find in your annual report a note from the governance committee. The board measures itself and then reports to the governance committee, which does an audit and a review and verifies that. We don't do it ourselves. The final piece of the appraisal, we also appraise our individual performances in terms of attending meetings, contributions, things like that. The final piece is when they ask me to leave the room and they talk about me for a short while. They haven't come back to me since their last appraisal, so I presume I'm doing a reasonable job. We've made progress in that regard, but it's a work in progress. But I want you Bird Club affiliates and members to know how seriously the executive board, Mark and BirdLife, take the issues of performance, governance, and the fiduciary duty with which we are entrusted. These are non-negotiable imperatives. Another thing, by the way, the executive board meets once a month. Before I get there, the bird club to which I belong, and Beth Hackland will confirm this, place on the same level as conservation and biodiversity, having fun. And that's what we're doing this weekend as well. Having fun is absolutely important to what we do. At our meetings, I don't mind telling you, usually when we conclude our meetings, we end up with a little sing-along led by the baritone supreme, Darby. We oil our vocal cords with a bottle of wine. Not per person, between us. But we have fun, and it's fabulous. It wasn't very good. The second thing I want to do, and it's just some comments, if I may. All about partnering. Partnering and partnerships, so important to the health of our organization. In the Royal Society of Protection of Birds, we have a fantastic British partner which gives us incredible support. They have over 1 million members. Imagine if we had 1 million members, how we could really knock conservation and biodiversity on the head, the difference we would make. They have 1 million members. We have fantastic support from BirdLife International. They both rate us in the top rank of birding organizations worldwide, and we're very proud of that. And we intend to continue and improve on that. We then have great corporate and personal patrons and sponsors, many of them here today. Without them, without you, we would be but a shadow of our current self. There are then numerous other NGO friends such as WWF South Africa, EWT, WESA, Sandparks Honorary Rangers. We also partner with universities such as the Percy Fitzpatrick Institute and the ADU at the University of Cape Town. We have good relationships with government departments and organs of state such as the DEA and SANBI. Our staff are not just a partnership, they're a great family a fabulous team. Then there are volunteers and helpers who give so freely of their time, talents, and funds. A relatively new partnership, all of 3 years old, is the BirdLife National Trust. My co-trustees, all respected and renowned businessmen, David Lawrence at Investec, Michael Spicer, formerly Anglo-American, Humphrey Borkham, formerly Johannesburg Stock Exchange, my co-trustees and Mark, are determined to build and grow that trust into an entity which can provide a solid financial base for BirdLife going into the future. We've made great strides. Isdale House, the property and building reside in that trust. It's worth, we gather, over 14 million rand. It's a magnificent head office, and hardly any of the funds, money, which went into that development, hardly any at all, 1,000 or so at the most, came from our conservation funds. The rest was from donors, sponsors, patrons, many, many of them. Last but most important is our partnership with our direct members and our affiliated bird clubs. I remind the board every time we meet how critically important it is for us to foster relationships and communication with bird clubs and our direct members. And we do have a substantial network in place, internet-based, etc., where we accomplish that. Another bit of partnering is that between the board and myself and the chief executive. And I can tell you it's a great partnership. We work well together, we perform well together, and we do, and the chief executive, as you know, doing a great job. I work with Mark on a daily basis. We communicate frequently. As those of you who know Mark will know, communicating with him means 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. He and I squabble a bit every now and again, but he eventually comes around to my way of thinking and agrees. The reason I mention all of this partnering, and it's my final comment, in the face of the constant and increasing threats from numerous quarters to our precious birds and their habitats, it's a great comfort to us to know that our work is supported by such a wonderful web of connections, partnerships, and supporters. We still have further items on the agenda. That's all I wish to say. Thank you. You, so far at least, have been a great audience, congregation, and parliament of wise owls. You're a fabulous audience. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, after all that fun and games, something a little more prosaic and cerebral. I'd like to ask our financial manager, Fani du Plessis, to present the annual accounts and the treasurer's report.
Hi everyone. Unfortunately, our treasurer, Mike McCullough, can't be here today, so I will be presenting his report on his behalf. I'm pleased, and if you can't see properly on the slides, they are reflected on page 28 in your annual report, so you can also look at them. So we're starting with the income statement. I'm pleased to report that despite tough economic times, the organization has achieved a net operating income for the 6th year running. The net income from operations for the year ended 31 December 2015 amounts to 491,000, compared to 891,000 for the 2014 year. I would like to express our gratitude towards all donors who have ensured that the organization's administrative expenses were once again covered by and large. The net operating income for the year effectively arises from the following. Firstly, investment income. In 2015, this was 849,000 compared to 732,000 in 2014. Membership, This year it was 276,000, a little bit down from last year, which was 539,000. The main reason for the reduction was a decrease in corporate and conservation league members. Publications, the figures in 2015 was 47,000 compared to 130,000 in 2014. The main reason for the decrease there in the income from publications is just an increase in the design costs and all the operating costs of the magazine. All activities mentioned above are ultimately aimed at supporting BirdLife South Africa's main objective, which is the conservation of our country's birds and their habitats. Most of the organization's conservation programs and projects were sufficiently funded during the year. Total revenue for projects increased from 13.7 million in 2014 to 16.3 million for the year under review. The Wakkerstroom Center continues to incur losses due to the absence of suitable funders. Total gross income increased from 22.2 million in 2014 to 26 million basically for the year under review. BirdLife South Africa remains very grateful to all donors, irrespective of the value of the donation. Additional to the net income from operations, the surplus on the sale of investments and also the sale of our Lewis House property reduced by the donation to the BirdLife National Trust resulted in a net income for 2015 of 524,000 compared to 1.2 million in 2014. Look at the balance sheet, the financial position. The financial position for the organization remains healthy. The ratio of current assets versus current liabilities has remained stable since the 2014 year of assessment. Current assets mainly comprises of cash and cash equivalents and are efficient to cover current liabilities, mainly comprising of funding received in advance. Accumulated funds for the year under review has grown slightly from prior year to just under 10 million. This mainly consists of retained income to the value of 1.1 million and just about 6 million in sustainability fund, and the excess of the market value of investments over initial cost of 2.6 million. The financial statements for the year ending 31 December 2015 have been audited by KPMG and approved by the Executive Board. I thank KPMG again for their services and appreciate the cordial relationships that exist for the advice and for the advice received from them during the year. The financial statements that was audited by them has been on our website for a week, so I hope some of you that wanted to was in the position to go and look at them. So I just want to ask at this stage if there's any questions regarding the finances. Thanks. If there's no questions, then I will propose that the financial statements for BirdLife South Africa for the year ending 31 December 2015 be adopted by members. Thanks, Jeff. Over there. And yeah, the next point then is appointment of auditors. Thanks.
Thank you, Fani. As Mark said earlier, we really are grateful that after several years, going back several years, after several years of losses and struggling finances, and in essence, it's been since Mark joined us, when with the help of certain wonderful friends, we've got the finances back in shape to the point where we are making surpluses every year. We try not to make too much. We squirrel it away wherever we can. But as our auditors keep on telling us, there's nothing wrong with making profits, even though we're an NGO. The receiver of revenue does not expect us to make losses, so he doesn't mind if we make modest profits and put it away to reserves. Thank you for that, Fani. Ladies and gentlemen, the organization's auditors for several years have been KPMG. The partner there who oversees our audit is Mike Evans, who does fantastic work for us and is a great friend. They have agreed to continue to serve as auditors, so I should like to record, it should be a formal vote and the secretary will record it thus, but I'd like to record your agreement that we again appoint KPMG as our auditors for the following year. Also, and I'm doing this a little informally, you'll also record your approval, not only of the Chief Executive's report, but of the financial report as well. There is one further address to come, and we look forward to that. It will be the citation for the Gill Memorial Medal Award. Before we get there, there are a few basic housekeeping items, if I may deal with them quickly. And that's item 9, nomination of election and election of office bearers. Firstly, the Honorary President, Phoebe Barnard, has served with great distinction for the last 4 years, and she's been a wonderful help and inspiration to us. She has come to the end of her term of office, so Phoebe will be standing down. In terms of the Constitution, we called for nominations for President for the following 4 years. Mark, is this supposed to come up on the screen? We have one nomination as Honorary President for the next 4 years, and that's Colleen Downs, who's sitting right at the back, I think. There she is, smiling at me. We have one nomination as President, Colleen Downs, and with your approval, those of you members who are able to vote, may I please accept that. Nominated by Von Pennington and seconded by Darby Chamberlain. Thank you. We also require a new Honorary Treasurer, Mike McCulloch, who's not here today. He's relocated to Cape Town, has served as Honorary Treasurer with great distinction and help for many years. He's been a huge help to the organization. He has also stepped down, and once again, nominations were called for. We received one nomination as Honorary Treasurer, and that is Tony Zogby, who's known to many of you. He was nominated by Von Pennington, again seconded by Darby Chamberlain. So with your agreement, we have a new Honorary Treasurer as from this annual general meeting, and that's Tony Zogby. And there's one item not for voting on, but for noting. We have 3 regional forums, and each regional forum is entitled to nominate one representative to the Executive Board of BirdLife South Africa. They are our essential link, first link with the affiliated clubs. Vernon Head, who was my predecessor as chairman, had represented the West Cape Bird Forum for many years. He has now stood down, and the forum has nominated Mark Brown in his stead. So that is not for voting on, it is for noting. We have a new board member who I think is in the audience, Mark? No. But that is for noting. Item 10, we're really getting through this at a pace, is the launches of certain initiatives and publications, and Mark Anderson will deal with that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roger. I think before we go to this little section of the agenda for the AGM, Colleen, maybe you'd like to stand. I don't know if everybody's seen who you are and knows who you are, and most people know who you are. Colleen is a professor at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She's does a lot of really interesting work on birds. I've known her for a very long time. I have an uncompleted PhD. When my PhD supervisor passed away, she took over as my PhD supervisor. That's never been written up, so maybe we should work on it while you're president, Colleen. That would be a challenge. And then for those who don't know Tony Zogby, I think a lot of you know Tony. Tony, you're there. Tony, stand up so we can all see. Tony is a partner at Deloitte. He's also treasurer of the Sandparks Honorary Rangers West Rand region. He's very involved in the Honorary Rangers work. His partner, Lorna, is the daughter of Ian White, the famous Kruger scientist who addressed us yesterday morning, or day before yesterday morning. So, Tony, we look forward to working with you. I know Fani does in particular, so welcome to the team, both of you. Okay, on the agenda of these meetings is just the launch of initiatives and publications, something I think Vernon asked for in the past. Bird of the year this year is the sociable weaver. For those who've never traveled to the western parts of the country, you won't know that bird, built the largest bird nest in the world. We've developed lots of materials around Bird of the Year 2016, including a poster which was distributed in the March-April issue of African BirdLife magazine. If you don't have a copy and like a copy, Shireen has a whole lot of copies at the back of the room. You can pick up a copy from her there. We have lots of copies at the office. If you have a home for a copy, and a home means a school classroom wall or a library wall, we'd love you to come and collect some, or ask us to post them to you, so we can distribute these posters around the country so people can become more aware of Bird of the Year. There's also Bird of the Year pin badges, which are available from the BirdLife South Africa desk in the foyer. We've also developed lesson plans and crosswords and puzzles and all sorts of other activities for children. Those have been available on our website as from this morning. Got an email from Nikki, and those will be distributed widely to schools. Of course, we also include an article on the Bird of the Year in every issue of our magazine. And Peter Ryan's team at the Fitzpatrick Institute are helping us with a lot of these materials. The Bird of the Year next year to announce is going to be the leopard-faced vulture. It was a bit of a toss-up between the TULUVER and the vulture. Vulture won in the end. We actually asked for nominations for Bird of the Year. We asked the club's members, staff for nominations. We got some really, really good nominations this year. African black oyster catcher. I think what some of the others were. There was 2 nominations for vultures. There were a few other nominations. What we then do is our marketing committee, which meets monthly, review these nominations, and we decide on which is the most appropriate species, taking a whole lot of factors into account. You know, was the previous Bird of the Year a big bird? Was the previous Bird of the Year a common bird or a threatened bird? Are there any strategic reasons why we need that specific species in the following year's Bird of the Year? We then take a proposal to the executive board, and they say yay or nay. So next year's Bird of the Year is the leopard-faced vulture. I think we all know it. Some of you have probably seen them this week. Charismatic species, characteristic species, well-known, easily identifiable, an ambassador for other vultures. As we will know, 4 species of African vultures were uplisted to critically endangered last year, end of last year, so globally critically endangered. I think we can use the opportunity next year with leopard-faced vulture as the Bird of the Year to try and raise awareness about the plight of our continent's vultures. BirdLife International is also going to be putting increased emphasis on the conservation of vultures across the continent. Lots of money is being raised. 3 gala dinners in Japan, the 3rd of which was last week, which Peter Sullivan attended. And millions of rands are being raised to undertake important vulture conservation work in Africa. And I think this could be one of our contributions as BirdLife South Africa to BirdLife International's work to conserve the vultures across the continent. So next year you'll be hearing a lot more about the leopard-faced vulture. I'd like to encourage our members and bird clubs to continue to nominate Birds of the Year when we call for nominations, because we do spend a lot of time reviewing those nominations. And at times it's really difficult. This last occasion, I know we had lots of debate, extensive debate. Mel Tripp, Vernon Head, our ad agency, Utopia, Fanny du Plessis, events manager Nikki McCartney, and Emma Asquez and Siobhan Anagia, all involved, and we looked at the pros and cons of which species is the most appropriate for Bird of the Year. Okay, the next point is the checklist. We launch our checklist, our bird checklist, at each AGM. This is, I think, the 6th, let me have a look here quickly, the 7th consecutive annual checklist that we've been produced, sponsored by Zeiss. We're very grateful for the sponsorship. Craig, are you? Yeah, Craig Smith from Zeiss. No. I've actually asked this every day this week, and he's out birding, testing those new Zeiss binoculars, I think. Gail Jadani, the MD of Zeiss, is she? Yeah. Gail? No, not yet. Okay. But we're really grateful to Zeiss for the support. I have regular interaction with Gail, the MD of Zeiss, and she says we need to write up this as a case study, the relationship with BirdLife South Africa and Zeiss. Zeiss became involved 7 years ago through the then MD Daniel Sims. they've actually seen an increase in binocular sales during these 7 years, and they feel they can attribute it to the relationship that they've had with BirdLife South Africa. So the 2016 checklist has been produced. There's a sociable weaver on the cover. The bird of the year is always on the cover of the checklist. There's been a few changes to the list as of 2016. Snowy egret's been added to the list. We've now have 847 bird species in South Africa. There's been 6 changes to scientific names. There's been a few red data book status changes, especially for the vultures. As you know, 4 species are listed to critically endangered. The checklist was distributed in the January-February issue of African BirdLife magazine. We do have other copies. Shireen, where are you? I think there are copies at the back. You could just chat to Shireen if you'd like copies of the checklist. Now, this is a South African checklist. Now, everybody has Southern African lists. We're a very patriotic organization. We want to know how many birds we have in our country. We know we have 847 bird species in South Africa. Okay, that's what the inside of the checklist looks like. The list is compiled by the BirdLife South Africa List Committee under the leadership of Dr. Chris Lotz. And we'd like to thank Chris from Bidding Equitors for all his support. And the committee has a complement of 14 people. A number of them are sitting in this room. So thanks very much for everybody for their contributions. Ons het ook 'n Afrikaanse weergawe van die checklist en maar dis nie net in PDF formaat en dit kan afgelaai word van ons webbladsy. Hoe is my Afrikaans? Maybe I should switch to English. We have a group called the Afrikaanse Voelnaamgroep. It's a committee of 11 people under the chairmanship of Dr. Mornay de la Rey, and they help us produce this Afrikaans checklist. Unfortunately, we don't have a sponsor to print a copy of the checklist, but it is available on our website in PDF format. Ernst Retief and Hanneline Swit-Robinson also quite involved in the production of this checklist. So if anybody knows of a sponsor, we'd love to be able to produce an Afrikaans checklist as well. In fact, not only an Afrikaans checklist, we'd love to have checklists in other South African languages. How nice would it be to have a checklist in Setswana and Sepedi and Zulu and other African languages? Okay, the last thing I have to say, Mr. Chairman, is about future flocks. We have a flock next year, and we've been working on this flock for a while. And in fact, it's been quite tricky for the flock organizing committee to simultaneously organize 2 flocks. And it was with great relief, our last flock organizing committee meeting, that we put this flock to bed. And now we only have 1 flock to focus on, which is Flock at Sea again, 2017. And we are going to sea next year, 24th to the 28th of April, 2017. You remember we did a similar trip in March 2013. We went up the coast in the fog to Walvis Bay. This time we're going to avoid the fog. We're heading south to the edge of the continental shelf, and Ross tells me it's one of the prime seabirding areas in the world. I look forward to this trip. Ross has promised to teach me the difference between a wandering albatross and a Cape Gannet. But not far in Peter. We'd like to encourage those who haven't booked a cabin to do so. As of yesterday, Gisela Ortner, our star volunteer on our flock organizing committees, told me that we now have 1,601 birders on the cruise, and I think it's 587 cabins booked or something. We've got about another 177 cabins to go to make sure that this is an exclusive birding trip. So it is exclusive in the fact that we are going to the edge of the continental shelf on a route that has been determined by Ross and Trevor Hardecker and others, but we still don't have full control of the program. So we may want to ditch the comedy hour and the cabaret, or maybe schedule it for different times of the day. So we want to ensure that we have all cabins taken up by birders. So please, if you haven't booked, now's the opportunity. Unfortunately, MEC has a dynamic pricing policy, so the prices of the berths are not as cheap as they were a year ago. Ross, Gisela, and a couple of others and I went onto the ship a few weeks ago in Durban, and we met with the captain. He's very happy with the route. He's also approved the fact that we can chum from the ship. So we're going to be taking a couple of tons of chum. If the weather's suitable, we will be chumming for seabirds. We also have Peter Harrison, the world's expert on seabirds, joining us in the cruise again, and he will be lecturing together with another number of other lecturers. So watch this space. Flock 2018 is still undecided. There's been a proposal or two, and the Flock Organizing Committee will be evaluating those proposals to determine where Flock will be held in 2018. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
But before I get to the Gill Memorial Award, the item on the agenda says we've come to the end of the formal agenda and business. Under any other business, is there anything which anybody would like to say or raise? Nope. In which case, can I call upon Phoebe again? Fabulous Phoebe.
Thank you, Roger. Let no one associate the song of the Hadida with my swan song as the president of BirdLife South Africa. Anyone who knows me will know that when I came to South Africa, Hadidas were restricted to quite small areas, and I was alarmed to see that in the subsequent 32 years, they've spread to virtually everywhere I go, even the most remote whitewater rafting pentads on the Orange River. So it's a bit alarming. Anyway, I'll try not to use the word. I'm going to draw heavily on the very nice nomination that was prepared for the Gill Memorial Medal Award this year by Drs. Rob Little, Ross Swanless, and Professor Peter Ryan. So forgive me if I take the slightly edited version and read what they very nicely wrote. Professor Phil Hockey was a scientist and ecologist of unusual acumen. Although he chose quality over quantity for research papers, he was nonetheless a very prolific scientist. He supervised more than 40 postgraduate students, wrote over 100 research papers and over 150 popular articles. That's good going for anyone. He was a giant in both the birding and ornithological worlds, two worlds that relatively few people straddle easily. And this status was only enhanced by his quite irreverent style and wry sense of humor. Presentations from visiting scientists and students alike were guaranteed to receive incisive questions and insightful suggestions on just about any topic. Phil was a dyed-in-the-wool Percy Fitzpatrick man. His PhD and his entire career were undertaken at the Institute. He first came part-time from the United Kingdom in 1976 to assist with a study of breeding white-fronted plovers at Langebaan Lagoon. And then he later moved to South Africa in 1979, getting his PhD from the University of Cape Town in 1983 for his now famous study of the ecology of the African black oyster catcher. Most of his subsequent work focused on coastal and estuarine bird ecology, bird migration, life history evolution, and the ecology of rarity, as well as in recent years, climate change. In all of this, he aimed not only to do good science, but to promote good conservation strategies and to predict birds' responses to global environmental change. Phil's interests in shorebirds took him to tropical Africa, the Indian Ocean Islands, to South America, the Canaries, and the Middle East. He led research expeditions to Chile, the Canaries, Mauritius, Seychelles, Kenya, Madagascar, the Arabian Gulf, and Namibia. His focus on coastal waders and their food supply established him as an authority on African waders, and in 1995 he published the monograph Waders of Southern Africa with Strike Winchester in Cape Town. By the late 90s, Phil was recognized as one of the most experienced ornithologists in Southern Africa and was tasked as editor-in-chief, along with Richard Dean, and Peter Ryan of the 7th edition of Robert's Birds of Southern Africa. I'm glad that Peter's still sitting here as evidence that one could survive that, but it was a massive piece of work, as you can all imagine. Phil was appointed as director of the Fitzpatrick Institute in July 2008. He led the DST NRF Centre of Excellence, established through quite hard work by his predecessor, Mornay du Plessis, and his team, including Phil, to new heights. Phil capitalized on that opportunity to full extent, using his strategic insight, persuasive personality, and unbending determination to secure renewal of the Centre of Excellence status later on, and thereby help secure long-term benefits for bird research, conservation, and of course the Fitz itself. During Phil's time at the Institute, he graduated 33 MSc students, 18 PhDs, and supervised 8 postdoctoral fellows, over 30 honors projects. The impact of his and his students' research has been disseminated in over 120 scientific publications. Phil was also an advisory member of 17 learned societies, councils, and steering committees, and was recently on the editorial board of the journal Biological Conservation and the International Advisory Group of the journal Public Library of Sciences, or PLOS. He was passionate about the need to disseminate science and the conservation of birds to a much wider audience. He frequently gave public lectures, radio and TV interviews. He published over 150 semi-popular articles and 12 books and book chapters. In 2000, he was named Marine and Coastal Communicator of the Year by SANCOR, the South African Network for Coastal and Oceanic Research, and the Government Department of Marine and Coastal Management. And in 2008, he was awarded the Stevenson Hamilton Medal of the Zoological Society for Southern Africa, ZSSA, for contributions to the public awareness of science. Phil's insights and leadership in ornithology were exemplary by a wide range of the ornithological sector. He will be remembered through his vast contribution to the avian literature, both scientific and popular. Phil touched the hearts and lives of many students and other people, from deeply insightful discussions of birds to warm interactions on life itself, normally over a beer at the pub on a Friday night. He was a deeply caring person with an open heart, and is sorely missed by his very loving wife, Sam, the rest of his family, ornithologists worldwide, the zoological community, and I think our country as a whole. It therefore gives me great pleasure to present his successor, Peter Ryan, Phil Hockey's posthumous award of the Gill Memorial Medal.
Thanks very much, Phoebe. It's obviously a very bittersweet occasion to be standing here. I wish Phil could be here, obviously. I don't know if we can dim the house lights. Is that possible or not at all? I don't know. Okay, it doesn't. We've suffered through the bad slide, so we can carry on. It's traditional of these things for the recipient to give a response, because obviously Phil's not here to give that response, and unfortunately his wife Samantha couldn't be here for sort of the right reasons in a way. One of the things that Phil did when he knew he was dying was to donate sperm, and Samantha is now carrying Phil's child. So Phil, who avidly avoided having children his whole life, is now posthumously imposing a new hockey on the world. So that's going to be something to look forward to in the future. So Samantha couldn't be here because she's expecting in June and didn't want to travel. And so I've been asked just to say a few words of thanks on Phil's behalf. And I think really all I want to do is just run through a few images of Phil's life, just to remind you all of the sort of the impact that he had, what an interesting guy he was. And I'm sure many of you will have very fond memories, and I hope these pictures jog those memories. Oh, that's wonderful, thanks. So here's a picture of Phil that none of us knew. Phil growing up in the UK, he had a passion for cars which went right through his life. He always had an MG in the garage or a this or a that. So in addition to birds, he was a bit of a car fanatic on the side, and he obviously got that at an early age. As Phoebe said, Phil came to South Africa in the 1970s, initially to work with Ron Summers, and he liked what he did when he was here, and he was recruited by the FITS to do a PhD on African oyster catchers. And this is Phil standing on the stoop of the house on Marcus Island, where he did most of his research on oyster catchers for his PhD with the late Manfred Waltner. Really very special times for those of us who have been around long enough to remember the days of the Western Cape Wader Study Group. And it was here that Phil did much of his seminal work on the oyster catchers. It really was quite exciting at the time. He showed how oyster catchers were instrumental in driving the structure of intertidal communities. And he was, really quite at the front of that work. And probably his most exciting paper was one that appeared in the American Naturalist called Riddle of the Sands, which explained the distribution of shorebirds across the world and why they make such ridiculously long distance migrations, why they bother to come all the way to the southern tip of Africa and the southern tip of South America from their breeding grounds in the tundra. And so some pictures of Phil from his early days as a student on the left, when he was particularly hairy, and then he was appointed to the staff of the Institute. He became a little bit more sober. This was in the good old days when, I mean, in terms of hairiness anyway. Phil had a remarkable capacity for enjoying life. He would work hard, but he would also play hard. And I'm sure all of you have lots of memories of playing hard with Phil, but he also had an incredible capacity for work. So he would just get stuck into a problem, and the production of Roberts was a prime example of that. People don't fully understand the amount of work that book took. As Phil matured, he contributed a lot towards training of students. Of course, that's one of our core activities at the Institute. This is Phil with William Bond in the field with a bunch of conservation master students. And Phoebe's already given you the statistics, but he supervised more than 40 postgraduate students, quite a lot of papers, about 120 peer-reviewed papers, lots of popular articles. Phil was really one of the driving forces behind the success of Africa Birds and Birding. And when that magazine founded, for various reasons, he was, really instrumental in setting up with Mark and BirdLife South Africa, the successor magazine, African BirdLife. And I think we should all be very grateful for that contribution. And Phil loved puzzles. He was a member of Mensa, and I don't know whether you remember in the old days, there were all those Christmas crosswords and these funny little word game puzzles and these humorous articles. A lot of those which were, not attributed to anyone were done by Phil. And I think his biggest legacy, certainly for most of us in the room here, is his contribution to popularizing ornithology through his books and monographs. So he was one of the founder authors of Sasol Birds. He was a very keen birder. He loved going out. He knew an awful lot about identifying birds, but he also knew a lot of facts about birds, and he pulled all that together in the monographs on waders and then in Roberts. And when he was asked to do so, Phil stepped to the fore and took the lead in running the Institute. Here he is talking to the Minister of Science and Technology, Naledi Pandor. It's quite an interesting job running a Centre of Excellence. One has to go every year and sort of sing for your supper with the Minister. And it's not the easiest of jobs. Phil also saw in his tenure as Director of the FITS the 50th anniversary celebrations. He had the coup of bringing David Attenborough to the FITS to come and give a popular lecture, which, with the help of Patrick Niven, who was an old Cambridge friend of David Attenborough. But for most of us, this is the Phil we remember. As Phoebe said, he was a Fitzpatrick man through and through. He always took the chance to go to the Fitzpatrick Tavern and down a beer or two. And Phil was at his happiest, I think, when he was out in the field. He loved being particularly in the Kalahari and in the Namib, running tours to Namibia, took every opportunity to get out in his 4x4 and go and enjoy the bush. So, as I say, it's a bittersweet occasion, but thank you very much for posthumously recognizing the contribution that Phil has made to ornithology in this part of the world.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was great. Wonderful. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the end of proceedings. I'd just like to note a few votes of thanks. Firstly, the team at BirdLife has put an enormous amount of effort into putting this event together. It's been a fabulous conference. And I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. Sorry. I apologize. I didn't mean that. It's been a wonderful conference and lab. It really has been fantastic, but just a few words of thanks to the BirdLife staff, Nikki McCartney, who I don't think's here, Linda, Hanneline, Sine, Pam, and most of all, gorgeous Gisela. Please stand up, Gisela Ortner. Thank you also to West Rand Honorary Rangers, who've been an enormous help to us. Glenn Phillips and Sam Parks, our community bird guy, and the bird tour operators who've also been fantastic. Now, we're about to close. Could I ask Mark Anderson to come up and join me? I am the conductor of the orchestra. See how he listens to me. I'm the conductor of the orchestra. He's the leader of the orchestra. So I thought it appropriate if he joined me here before we close. Just three things. Firstly, to our honorary president, Phoebe. We have a small gift, Phoebe, if you don't mind coming up here. Thank you for all you've done for BirdLife and will do. And secondly, the BirdLife Company Secretary, who's been around BirdLife longer than anybody else, and that's quite some time, is Pam Barrett. Pam will be retiring later this year. She's been an unbelievable servant to BirdLife and right-hand person to Mark and myself. I'm very grateful for all the help she's given me in particular over the years, and I'm sure Mark would second that. Pam, you've been an absolute star. Perfect, Pam, we call you. Please stand up while we're talking about it. Pam has been fantastic. Pam will not be lost to us. She doesn't live far away. I'm sure she'll be a volunteer and a friend to BirdLife for many years to come. We will continue to see her at these conferences. Mark and I have issued a special, I think we've issued it already, invitation to her. Do you mind me saying? We've, like Pam, we insist Pam joins us at Flock 17 at Sea next year. So we'll be seeing much more of her in the future, and we are very grateful for everything she's done for BirdLife in the past. Mark, I ask you to join me up here because you're the leader of the orchestra. If you'd like to, I would hand over to you to close the proceedings. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Roger. And just also thanks to Roger for all he does for BirdLife South Africa. He's been a volunteer for a number of years, involved in several committees, helped rewrite our constitution, involved in the trust, and now as our chairman. And Roger, we really like having you on the team. And thanks very much for what you do. I'd just like to reiterate what Roger said. These things don't just happen on their own. There's a big team of people that make it happen. And the flock organizing committee is a team of staff and volunteers. And I've just mentioned the people. I just have to mention Gizzy again. Gizzy is just, she's amazing. She's one of the first people I met when I moved to Joburg, and she's been a great friend and volunteer and much, much more. So thank you very much for that, Gizzy. And Don Williams is here. Is Don in the room at the moment? Don, he's gone. Don's outside. Don hasn't been very well of late. His wife is not very well. He's the chairman of BirdLife South. He's given up so much of his time this week. I think for those who esteemed just now, please just give him a pat on the back and thank him for all the work he's done. And then finally, just to thank John Bowie and Stevie Barnard for their assistance with the videoing of this lab and the AGM and live streaming it to the world. John, I'm not sure whether our future president's partner has your skills. We hope to retain you in the team one way or another. But this is quite unique, I think, for a for a conservation NGO in South Africa, maybe anywhere in the world, to be able to live stream their AGMs to their members. And John, you have skills that none of us have, vaguely. So we'd like to thank you for this, and I know it's a huge effort. Thanks very much, John. We really appreciate it. Thank you. That leads us to the end of the AGM. Less than 2 hours, I think, 2 hours on the dot. That's great. Thank you. We've got a dinner tonight at 7 o'clock, and I've got no idea where the dinner's taking place. Linda and Hanneline aren't here. Is it here, Gizzy? Okay. So it was going to be down at the river, not at the river, outside Cattle Barren on the balcony. But I think because of the possibility of rain, they're holding it up here again. 7 o'clock this evening. See you all then. Thank you.
Still on.
Thanks, Natalie.